A waitress solves a guest's problem in 6 languages. Unaware her customer was a global CEO billionaire. You will clear the table, and you will do it with a smile, or you will be clearing out your locker. The biting cold of the manager's voice was a familiar poison. A daily dose of humiliation Alara had learned to swallow without flinching. The relentless hammering of the rain against the polished floor-to-ceiling windows of Aurelia seemed to echo the frantic thudding in her own chest, a desperate rhythm that had become the soundtrack to her life. She nodded, her expression carefully neutral, the worn fabric of her uniform feeling impossibly thin against the chill that had nothing to do with the weather and everything to do with the sterile silence that followed his command. He was gone. Alara moved through the cavernous dining room, a ghost in a world of gleaming silver and crisp white linen. Her reflection in the dark windows was a pale, fragile thing, her eyes looking hollow in the flickering light of the ornate table lamps. Each day was a performance of quiet dignity, a steady and unwavering mask she wore to hide the desperate panic that clawed at her throat. Her daughter, Lily, was at home with a fever that wouldn't break, and the rent was due tomorrow, a looming shadow that threatened to swallow them whole. She possessed an immense inner strength, a reservoir of resilience she drew from every morning, but she had no material resources, no safety net, just the threadbare hope that this shift, this one night, would bring enough in tips to keep the darkness at bay for one more day. The clinking of crystal glasses and the soft murmur of conversations from the remaining patrons felt like sounds from another universe, a world of warmth and security she could observe but never enter. Her hands, though steady, were trembling slightly as she gathered the used plates, the weight of them a physical manifestation of her burdens. She was just a waitress. She had once been more. She had been a scholar, a linguist who found sacred beauty in the cadence of a foreign tongue, a woman who believed in the power of words to build bridges. But life had a way of splintering dreams. A whirlwind romance, a beautiful child, and then the sudden, shattering loss of her husband had left her adrift in a sea of debt and grief. The degrees and accolades now gathered dust in a box under her bed, useless relics from a past life. Now, her world had shrunk to the circumference of these tables, her vocabulary to "May I take your order?" and "Enjoy your meal." The contrast was a raw, unspoken ache in her heart, a constant reminder of all that had vanished. She moved toward the last occupied table in her section, a small two-top tucked away in a shadowed corner, where a solitary man sat hunched over a laptop. He hadn't ordered anything but a black coffee an hour ago, and the cup sat cold and untouched. He looked as weary as she felt, his shoulders slumped, the amber hue of the lamp catching the gray streaks in his hair. He seemed entirely out of place, not because of his simple, unassuming clothes, but because of the profound aura of loneliness that clung to him like the heavy fog outside. He was staring at his screen, his jaw clenched, and she could feel his tension from across the room. She approached his table, her professional smile firmly in place. Her heart sank. The rain hammered down on the glass roof like 1,000 desperate fists, relentless and wild, each drop a tiny explosion against the fragile barrier separating the opulent warmth of the restaurant from the storm-tossed night. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the vast, high-ceilinged dining room of the mansion for a split second before darkness swallowed it whole, leaving only the soft glow of the table lamps to push back against the encroaching shadows. The man at the table, Adrian, didn't even notice. His world had narrowed to the frantic, multilingual chatter coming through his earbuds, a cacophony of urgent voices that signaled the collapse of a deal years in the making. His translators were grounded in Zurich, the connection was unstable, and millions of dollars, along with thousands of jobs, were evaporating with every passing second of misunderstanding. A wave of raw, unbearable grief washed over him, so powerful it almost stole his breath. It had been 2 years since Isabel had been taken from him, 2 years since the world had lost its color, its meaning. She would have loved this chaos. She would have thrived in it, effortlessly switching between German and Mandarin, her laughter a bridge between cultures, her brilliance a guiding light. Without her, he was just a man in a storm, a king with a crumbling empire, his vast wealth a useless shield against the hollowing ache of his loneliness. The deal was secondary. It was the feeling of utter helplessness, the stark reminder of his own limitations without her, that truly shattered him. He winced, rubbing his temples, the polished marble floor beneath his feet feeling as cold and unyielding as his future. He was failing. Alara approached the table, her footsteps a soft hush on the expensive rug, a sound he didn't register. She saw the deep lines of stress etched around his eyes, the pale cast of his skin under the lamp's golden glow. She recognized the look. It was desperation, a state of being she knew intimately. It was the same look she saw in her own reflection every morning. Her manager's cruel words still echoed in her ears, a warning to remain invisible, to be nothing more than a pair of hands clearing a table. But something in the man's haunted expression reached past her fear, past her exhaustion. It was a flicker of shared humanity in the sterile opulence of the room. He was speaking into his microphone, his voice strained, his English words stumbling against a wall of foreign replies. "No, that's not what I mean. Please, can someone explain the liability clause in Article 5 to Mr. Dubois?" A flurry of agitated French came through the speakers. He groaned, burying his face in his hands. He was lost. This was the moment, the pivot, the instant a universe of possibility balanced on the edge of a single decision. Alara hesitated, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Fired. The word was a branding iron, threatening to sear away the last of her stability. Lily's face flashed in her mind, her small body curled up in their threadbare blanket, her breathing shallow. She couldn't risk it. She had to turn away, clear the table, and vanish back into the shadows where she belonged. But then she heard the man's voice again, a quiet, broken whisper not meant for his conference call, but for himself. "I can't do this without you, Izzy." The name was a prayer, a lament. It was a sound of such profound loss that it splintered something inside Alara. It was the sound of her own grief for her own lost love. Her resolve cracked. In that second, she wasn't a waitress. She wasn't a desperate single mother. She was a woman who understood the language of a shattered heart. She took a deep, steadying breath. She stepped forward. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice gentle but clear, cutting through his bubble of stress. He looked up, his eyes dazed, uncomprehending. He saw only a uniform. "Perhaps I can help," before he could protest, before he could even fully process her presence. She reached out a hand, not for the coffee cup, but for his headset. A moment of stunned silence passed between them, a seismic shift in the quiet corner of the restaurant. He stared at her, a flicker of disbelief in his weary eyes. She gave him a small, sincere smile, a gesture of pure, unprompted kindness. He did not know it yet, but this moment would change everything. He nodded slowly and passed her the device. She accepted. The weight of the headset felt both foreign and deeply familiar, a relic from a life she thought was buried forever. Alara slipped it on, the cacophony of voices instantly flooding her senses. She closed her eyes for a brief second, not in prayer, but in focus, letting the streams of language untangle in her mind. She heard the sharp, precise tones of German, the fluid romance of French, the clipped efficiency of Japanese, the passionate cadence of Spanish, the rich, rolling sounds of Russian, and the melodic complexity of Mandarin. It was a symphony of global commerce, and for the first time in years, she felt a spark of her old self, the scholar, the communicator, ignite within the weary shell of the waitress. Her heart, which had been thudding with fear, now beat with a quiet, steady purpose. The man, Adrian, watched her, his expression a mixture of confusion and dawning awe. He had expected her to perhaps know a few phrases of French or Spanish. He was not prepared for what happened next. She leaned toward the microphone. A soft click echoed as she unmuted it. "Monsieur Dubois," she began, her French flawless, elegant, and infused with a calm authority that instantly silenced the agitated chatter on the line. "Forgive the interruption. My name is Alara. If you would please direct your attention to Article 5, Section B, you will see that the liability for shipping logistics is assumed by the holding company, not the primary investor. The indemnity clause protects your interests completely. A stunned silence came from the speaker. Then a slow, impressed, "Ah oui, je vois. Thank you, mademoiselle." She didn't pause. She transitioned seamlessly to German, addressing a Herr Schmidt about a discrepancy in the supply chain metrics, her technical vocabulary impeccable. She clarified a point on intellectual property rights in Japanese to a Ms. Tanaka, her tone formal and deeply respectful. She moved through the languages like a master musician playing a complex piece, each note perfect, each transition effortless. She soothed the fiery Spanish partner, reassured the cautious Russian, and explained a complex financial projection in fluent, persuasive Mandarin to the chairman in Beijing. She wasn't just translating. She was negotiating. She was commanding the conversation. Her voice a gentle but unwavering force that brought order to the chaos. She was building bridges. Adrian sat frozen, utterly captivated. He felt as if he were witnessing a miracle. This woman, in her simple, worn uniform, possessed a gift he hadn't seen since Isabel. It wasn't just the technical skill, which was breathtaking, but the empathy in her voice, the way she seemed to understand the unspoken cultural nuances behind the words. She was creating harmony, not just comprehension. A profound, cathartic wave of emotion washed over him. The tight knot of grief and stress that had been clenched in his chest for 2 years began to loosen. For the first time since the accident, a flicker of light pierced the heavy fog of his sorrow. He was watching a stranger perform an act of selfless, magnificent kindness, expecting nothing in return, and it was reawakening a part of his heart he thought had died forever. The deal, which had seemed so monumental moments before, now felt insignificant compared to the seismic event happening at this small table. He wasn't just watching his company being saved. He felt he was watching his soul being saved. The world outside, with its pounding rain and flickering light, vanished. There was only the sound of her voice, a steady, brilliant beacon in his darkness. She was magnificent. The call lasted for another 20 minutes. When it was over, when all parties had signed off with expressions of gratitude and admiration for the mysterious, eloquent woman who had saved the day, Alara finally removed the headset. She placed it gently on the polished table, the plastic making a soft click in the now heavy silence. The adrenaline faded, and the chilling reality of what she had done crashed down upon her. She had abandoned her duties. She had interacted with a guest in a way that was strictly forbidden. She looked up and saw her manager, Mr. Thompson, standing a few feet away, his face a mask of cold fury. His arms were crossed, his posture rigid. The air crackled with menace. A sharp gasp escaped her lips. "My office." Now the words were clipped, each one a tiny shard of ice. Mr. Thompson didn't even glance at Adrian. His eyes, small and cruel, were locked on Alara. The fragile bubble of connection, of shared humanity, shattered. Fear, cold and biting, flooded back into Alara's veins. She stood up, her legs feeling brittle and unsteady. She gave Adrian a quick, apologetic look, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. She had been foolish to hope, to act, to be anything more than what she was, a disposable employee. She turned and walked toward her manager's office, her shoulders squared in a familiar posture of dignified resignation. She knew what was coming. The short walk felt like miles, each step taking her further away from that brief, shining moment of purpose and closer to the abyss of unemployment. She was going to be fired. Adrian sat stunned for a moment, the scene playing out before him. The raw injustice of it was a physical blow. This woman had just performed an act of intellectual and empathetic brilliance that had saved his company a fortune, and she was about to be punished for it. He started to rise, a protest forming on his lips, but a commotion at the front of the restaurant drew his attention. A group of his own executives, who had been waiting for him at a nearby hotel, burst in, their faces alight with relief and excitement. "Mr. Vance, Adrian, the deal is closed. It's a miracle." The partners are ecstatic. They surrounded his table, clapping him on the back, their voices loud and jubilant in the quiet restaurant. They were oblivious to the small, human drama that had just unfolded. They did not see the fragile waitress being led away like a lamb to the slaughter. By the time Adrian could extricate himself, by the time he looked back toward the manager's office, it was too late. The door was closed. Inside the small, sterile office, the air was thick with unspoken condemnation. Mr. Thompson sat behind his large, ornate desk, a symbol of his petty power. Alara stood before him, her hands clasped tightly together to stop their trembling. "You are aware," he began, his voice dangerously soft, "that you are paid to serve food, not to interfere in the private business of our clientele." He didn't wait for an answer. "You broke protocol. You were unprofessional. You made a spectacle of yourself." Each accusation was a stone, and she felt the weight of them pressing down on her. "I'm sorry, sir," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The gentleman was in distress. "I only wanted to help." "Your job is not to help," he sneered, the word dripping with contempt. "Your job is to be invisible. You have failed. Pack your things. You are terminated." Effective immediately, it was done. The axe had fallen. A strange, hollow calm settled over Alara. There were no more tears to cry. There was only a vast, empty silence where her hope used to be. She nodded once, a gesture of quiet, unflinching acceptance. She turned and walked out of the office, her head held high. She was shattered, but she would not let him see her break. When Adrian finally reached the manager's office, the door opened and Alara emerged. Her face was pale, but her expression was composed. She walked right past him, her eyes focused on some distant point, as if she didn't even see him. "Wait," he called out, stepping in her path. "Please, what happened?" She finally looked at him, and for a second, he saw the raw pain behind her dignified mask. "I've been let go," she said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. "Thank you for your concern." She tried to move around him, but he gently placed a hand on her arm. "This is my fault. Let me fix this. Let me talk to him." She pulled her arm away, a flicker of her inner strength returning. "There is nothing to fix," she said, her voice a little stronger now. "Please, I have to go. My daughter is waiting." And with that, she was gone, disappearing through the staff entrance and out into the pounding rain. He stood there, helpless, watching her vanish. He looked down at his table and saw the only thing she had left behind: a small, flimsy receipt for a single cup of coffee. At the bottom, printed by the machine, was her name. Alara felt sacred. Adrian Vance was a man who built empires. He commanded boardrooms, moved markets, and shaped the skylines of cities. But in that moment, standing in the opulent, soulless restaurant, he had never felt more powerless. The injustice of Alara's dismissal burned in him, a cold, hard anger he hadn't felt in years. He strode over to the manager's office, his quiet, unassuming demeanor replaced by a commanding presence that made the jubilant executives fall silent. He didn't knock. He simply opened the door and stepped inside, closing it with a soft, definitive click behind him. Mr. Thompson looked up from his paperwork, his expression of smug satisfaction quickly turning to one of surprise, then irritation. "Can I help you, sir?" he asked, his tone laced with impatience. Adrian stood before the desk, his hands in his pockets, his gaze steady and unnerving. "The waitress," Adrian said, his voice calm but carrying an undeniable weight of authority. "Her name is Alara. You just fired her," Mr. Thompson scoffed. "She was an insubordinate employee. It is an internal matter." "You're mistaken," Adrian replied, his voice dropping slightly, becoming more intense. "It is now my matter. That woman single-handedly salvaged a $900 million international merger that you, in your profound ignorance, nearly cost me. Her interference was an act of linguistic genius." The manager's jaw dropped. The number hung in the air between them, incomprehensible. "900 million?" he stammered, his face draining of color. "I suggest you call your supervisor," Adrian continued, his voice as sharp and cold as polished steel. "Or perhaps the owner of this establishment. Tell them that Adrian Vance would like a word The name landed with the force of a physical blow. Adrian Vance. The Adrian Vance, CEO of Vance Global Enterprises, a titan of industry whose face was a regular feature on the covers of business magazines. Mr. Thompson's face contorted in a mask of dawning horror. He began to tremble, his petty tyranny evaporating in the face of true power. Mr. Vance, I had no idea. Of course you didn't. Adrian cut him off, his voice laced with contempt. You see a uniform, not a person. You see a rule breaker, not a savior. You can rehire her, of course, but she will not be returning. I will, however, be purchasing this restaurant. And my first act as its new owner will be to accept your resignation. Total silence. But vengeance felt hollow. It did nothing to help Alara, who was now out in the storm, jobless and alone. Adrian left the terrified manager to his fate and walked back into the main dining room. His team was waiting, buzzing with questions. He ignored them. His focus had narrowed to a single, urgent purpose: find Alara. He looked at the flimsy receipt in his hand. It was so little to go on. Just a first name and the name of the restaurant. He turned to his head of security, a large, formidable man named Marcus. I need you to find someone, Adrian said, his voice low and urgent. Her name is Alara. She worked here. I need to know everything. Where she lives, what she needs. Everything. And Marcus, be discreet. I don't want to frighten her. Marcus nodded, his expression serious. Consider it done, Mr. Vance. While his most trusted man began the search, Adrian's mind was racing. He couldn't just offer her money. That would feel like a transaction, a crude payment for her profound act of kindness. It would cheapen the sacredness of what she had done. This had to be different. It had to be delicate. He remembered the weariness in her eyes, the worn fabric of her uniform, the quiet dignity that clung to her like a second skin. He knew, with an instinct that went deeper than business, that she was suffering. And he knew, with an undeniable certainty that settled deep in his soul, that he was going to be her salvation. He would be her hidden savior. The search took 2 days. 2 days in which Adrian felt a restless energy he hadn't experienced in years. He finalized the acquisition of the restaurant, a trivial matter of digital signatures, but his mind was elsewhere. He was haunted by her face, by the memory of her voice weaving a tapestry of languages. When Marcus finally returned, the information he brought was a portrait of quiet, desperate hardship. Alara lived in a small, rundown apartment in a forgotten part of the city. She was a widow. Her daughter, Lily, suffered from a rare respiratory condition that required expensive medication and regular specialist visits. A mountain of medical bills sat on her kitchen table. Her landlord had just served her an eviction notice. The report was a litany of suffering, and each word tightened the knot of resolve in Adrian's chest. He now understood the true cost of her kindness that night. She had risked the very roof over her sick child's head to help a stranger. The thought was both humbling and infuriating. He immediately set his plan into motion. An anonymous wire transfer, routed through a charitable foundation he owned, paid off her entire medical debt. Another transfer paid her rent for the next 5 years. He contacted the world's leading pediatric pulmonologist in Boston and arranged for a consultation for Lily, covering all travel and expenses under the guise of a medical grant. A delivery truck, supposedly from a local church charity, arrived at her building with a year's worth of groceries, new warm blankets, winter coats, and a small, carefully chosen collection of children's books in multiple languages. He did it all from the shadows, a ghost benefactor moving silently through the architecture of her life. He wanted to give her peace, to lift the crushing weight of survival from her shoulders, so that the brilliant, kind woman he had seen for that brief moment could have a chance to breathe again. He was building a foundation of security for her, brick by anonymous brick. He just hoped it would be enough. He had to see her again. A week later, Alara stood in her small kitchen, the golden glow of the morning sun streaming through the clean window. A sense of bewildered peace had settled over her. The past few days had been a cascade of small miracles. The The frighteningly official letter from the hospital had turned out to be a notice that her entire balance had been paid by an anonymous benefactor. The angry, red-sealed eviction notice had been replaced by a letter from her landlord, stammering apologies and confirming her rent was paid in full for the foreseeable future. And then the delivery of food and clothing, enough to last them through the winter and beyond. She had cried, her tears not of sorrow, but of a profound, overwhelming gratitude that was so intense it was almost painful. She didn't understand it. She didn't know who to thank. She could only whisper her gratitude to the universe, to whatever unseen force had decided to shine a light on her and her daughter. Lily, wrapped in a new, soft blanket, was sitting at the table, her breathing already less labored thanks to the new medicine that had mysteriously appeared from the specialist pharmacy. For the first time in years, Alara felt a flicker of genuine hope. The constant, grinding fear had receded, leaving behind a quiet space where she could just be. The future was no longer a terrifying void but an unwritten page. She didn't have a job, but for the first time she had security. It was a strange and wonderful feeling. She was making tea, the simple, domestic ritual a comfort in itself, when a gentle knock echoed on her door. Her heart gave a little jump. No one ever came to her door. She opened it to find the man from the restaurant standing in the hallway. He was no longer the weary, disheveled stranger. He was dressed in an impeccable but simple dark sweater and trousers, and while the sadness was still there in the depths of his eyes, it was tempered by a gentle, sincere expression. He held a small potted orchid in his hands. He looked nervous. "Alara," he said, his voice quiet, "I hope I'm not intruding. I wanted to apologize for what happened, and to thank you he had found her." She stared at him, speechless. Of all the people she might have imagined at her door, it was not him. Disbelief warred with a sudden, inexplicable feeling of connection. He was the catalyst for both her ruin and, she was beginning to suspect, her salvation. "How did you find me?" she asked, her voice a little shaky. He offered a small, self-deprecating smile. "I can be resourceful. May I come in? I promise I won't stay long." She hesitated for a moment, then stepped aside, holding the door open. The sterile silence of her tiny apartment felt suddenly charged with his presence. He stepped inside, his eyes taking in the small, clean space, the stack of new children's books on the table, the warm blanket draped over the worn sofa. He saw the evidence of his own anonymous interventions, and a wave of relief washed over him. He had done the right thing. He turned to her, holding out the orchid. "This is for you, for what you did. It was the kindest thing anyone has ever done for me." She accepted the flower, her fingers brushing his. A spark, quiet but undeniable, passed between them. The gesture was so simple, so tender, it almost made her cry. No one had given her flowers in years. "It was nothing," she demurred, though they both knew it was a lie. It had been everything. "It was not nothing," he said, his gaze unwavering. "You have an extraordinary gift, Alara." He paused, searching for the right words. "I know you lost your job because of me, and I want to make it right. Not with a handout," he added quickly, seeing the flicker of pride in her eyes. "With a proposition. A job. I am in need of a translator, a communications consultant. For my company. The work would be demanding, but the pay would be substantial. You could work from home on your own schedule. It would give you time for your daughter." The offer hung in the air, a lifeline so perfect, so tailored to her needs, that it seemed too good to be true. A job that would use her skills, her mind? A job that would allow her to care for Lily? It was the dream she had long since abandoned. "Your company?" she asked, a hint of suspicion in her voice. "Who are you?" He looked down for a moment, a flicker of his deep-seated grief crossing his features. "My name is Adrian, and I run a small import-export business." It was a colossal lie, but it was a necessary one. He couldn't reveal the truth yet. He couldn't risk overwhelming her, of turning this fragile, nascent connection into something transactional. He needed her to see him as just Adrian, a man she had helped, not as a billionaire CEO. She studied his face, his sincere eyes, the quiet sadness that seemed to anchor him. She saw a good man, a man wounded by life, just as she was. And she made a decision. She trusted him. "I accept," she said, and a genuine smile, the first she had felt in a very long time, lit up her face. It was a new beginning. The weeks that followed were a quiet revelation. Adrian sent her work, complex contracts and international correspondence, and she would return them flawlessly translated. Often with insightful cultural notes he knew no professional service could provide. They communicated mostly through email and phone calls, but he found excuses to visit her small apartment, always under the guise of dropping off documents. He would bring pastries from a local bakery or a new book for Lily. He learned the rhythms of her life, her quiet strength, her fierce devotion to her daughter. He saw the scholar in her reemerge, her confidence growing with each successfully completed task. He found himself looking forward to their brief, simple interactions more than any multimillion-dollar board meeting. He was falling for her intellect, her resilience, her pure, selfless heart. She was the golden glow in his gray world. One evening, a heavy fog had descended upon the city, wrapping Alara's apartment building in a soft hush. Adrian had stopped by to drop off a new project, but a storm had knocked out the power in the neighborhood. They found themselves sitting in her small living room, the space illuminated only by a few flickering candles she had lit. The amber hue cast long shadows on the walls, creating an intimate, protected space, a small island of warmth against the cold, dark world outside. Lily was asleep in her room, her breathing deep and even. The usual pretense of business fell away, leaving a quiet, comfortable silence between them. It was in this gentle darkness that the walls around their hearts began to crumble. "You never talk about yourself, Adrian," Alara said softly, her voice barely a whisper. "I know you helped me, that you gave me this chance, but I don't know anything about you." Adrian looked at the flickering flame of the candle, his face a mask of old sorrows. The raw, unspoken grief he carried was palpable in the small room. He took a deep breath, and the story he had locked away for 2 years began to pour out of him. He told her about Isabel. He spoke of her brilliance, her passion for language and travel, her laughter that could fill a cavernous room. He described how they had met at a university lecture on ancient texts, how she had challenged his cynical, business-oriented worldview and taught him to see the beauty in connection, not just commerce. He confessed the unbearable weight of his loneliness since she was gone, how the world had become a sterile, transactional place, a series of problems to be solved rather than a life to be lived. "The night at the restaurant," he said, his voice cracking slightly, "when I heard you speaking all those languages, so effortlessly, so beautifully, for a moment, it felt like she was back. You have her spirit, Alara." That same light, a single tear traced a path down his cheek, glistening in the candlelight. He didn't wipe it away. Alara listened, her eyes steady and unwavering. She didn't offer empty platitudes or trite reassurances. She simply sat with him in his pain, her quiet presence a sacred offering. She understood. When he fell silent, the air thick with his grief, she reached out and refilled his cup of tea, a simple, grounding gesture of care. The warmth of the mug in his hands was a small anchor in his sea of sorrow. Then it was her turn. She told him about her husband, Michael, a kind, gentle man who had loved her fierce intellect. She spoke of their dreams of traveling the world, of raising their daughter to be a citizen of all nations. She described the sudden illness that had stolen him from them, the terrifying speed with which her world had collapsed, leaving her with a mountain of debt and a sick child. She confessed her own profound loneliness, the feeling of being a ghost in her own life, of having to bury her true self under layers of survival just to get through the day. They were two souls who had lost their anchors, adrift in the same ocean of grief. They had found each other. When she finished her story, he reached across the small table and gently placed his hand over hers. It wasn't a romantic gesture, not yet. It was a touch of pure, human connection, a silent acknowledgement of their shared, unspoken pain. A bond was forged between them in that dimly lit room, a bond of shared tragedy and nascent hope. They were no longer just an employer and an employee. They were survivors. The invitation arrived a month later. It was thick, cream-colored cardstock, the lettering in ornate, gleaming gold. Vance Global Enterprises requested the pleasure of her company at their annual foundation gala. A personal, handwritten note from Adrian was tucked inside. "I'm announcing a new international literacy initiative," it read. "I want you to be there. I'm arranging for a dress and a nurse to stay with Lily. Please say yes." Alara's heart thudded. This was a world she did not belong to, a world of polished marble and sleek power. But the thought of disappointing Adrian was worse than her fear. She agreed. The night of the gala, a car, a sleek, black sedan, arrived for her. A dress box was waiting on her bed, and when she opened it, she gasped. Inside was a deep sapphire gown, simple but exquisitely cut, the fabric as soft as water. It fit her as if it were made for her. When she looked in the mirror, she didn't see the worn, weary waitress. She saw a glimpse of the woman she used to be, the woman she was becoming again. She saw Alara. The ballroom was cavernous, a glittering universe of chandeliers and champagne. The air buzzed with the low hum of powerful people making powerful conversation. Alara felt a wave of vertigo. She clutched her small bag, feeling like an imposter, a fragile bird in a cage of lions. Adrian found her immediately, his eyes lighting up when he saw her. He looked commanding in his impeccable tuxedo, a man completely in his element. He took her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. "You look breathtaking," he murmured, his voice for her alone. He guided her through the crowd, introducing her simply as "my colleague, Alara." But the whispers followed them. Who was this unknown woman on the arm of the reclusive Adrian Vance? The speculation was a tangible force, and Alara felt herself shrinking under its weight. It was then that she saw a familiar face across the room, a face from her past that sent a biting cold dread through her veins. It was Beatrice, her late husband's mother. Beatrice was a woman carved from ice and ambition. She had never approved of Alara, viewing her son's marriage to a penniless academic as a stain on their family's social standing. After Michael's death, she had washed her hands of Alara and her sick granddaughter completely. Now she was here, a prominent board member of a rival corporation, her expression a mask of venomous surprise. She glided toward them, her diamonds glittering like shards of glass. "Well, well," Beatrice hissed, her voice loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Alara, I never thought I'd see you in a place like this. Did you finally find some rich man to take pity on you? You always were clever about leveraging that sad little story of yours." The public humiliation was swift and brutal. The surrounding conversations faltered. All eyes turned to them. Alara felt the blood drain from her face. She stood frozen, the cruelty of the words stripping her bare. She could feel the stares, the judgments. She wanted the polished marble floor to open up and swallow her whole. She remained dignified, her back straight, but her eyes glistened with the sheen of unshed tears. She was overwhelmed. Just as the silence stretched to an unbearable point, just as Beatrice was about to deliver another verbal blow, Adrian stepped forward, placing himself slightly in front of Alara in a gesture of unmistakable protection. His entrance was not loud or aggressive, but the calm, commanding shift in his posture drew every eye. The air crackled with a new tension. He looked at Beatrice, his expression not of anger, but of a profound, dismissive disappointment. "Beatrice," he said, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the hushed ballroom. "I believe you are mistaken." He then turned his gaze from Beatrice and addressed the captivated audience. "For those of you who do not know her, this is Alara. And you are correct about one thing. She does not belong in a world of petty gossip and cruel ambition. She belongs in a world of ideas, of connection, of brilliance." He paused, letting his words sink in. He then looked directly at Alara. His eyes filled with an unwavering admiration that was more intimate than any touch. This woman, who some might dismiss based on her circumstances, is one of the most intelligent and compassionate human beings I have ever met. She speaks 6 languages fluently, not as a party trick, but as a tool to build understanding in a world that desperately needs it. Another pause. The final revelation was delivered with surgical precision. Beatrice, you seem to think you know who I am. You see me as a business rival. But what you, and most of you, fail to understand is that my greatest asset is not my company. It is my ability to recognize true, irreplaceable talent. He took Alara's hand, his grip firm and steady. Alara is not my guest tonight. She is my new Vice President of International Relations for Vance Global. The literacy initiative I am announcing tonight was her idea. She will be overseeing a budget of $50 million to build educational bridges across the globe. The gasp from the crowd was a collective, seismic shock. Beatrice's face was a grotesque mixture of shock and horror. She was speechless. Adrian leaned in and whispered to her, his voice a blade of ice. You publicly attacked the future of my company and the future of my life. You are finished. He had completely reversed the power dynamic. He had not only defended Alara, he had elevated her, crowned her in front of the very people who sought to diminish her. He had given her a kingdom. After the gala, the drive back to Adrian's stately home was silent. The adrenaline of the confrontation had faded, leaving behind the raw, unspoken emotions that now shimmered in the space between them. The sleek car moved through the rain-slicked city streets, the lights blurring into streaks of gold and red. Alara stared out the window, her reflection a stranger in a sapphire gown. She had been humiliated and then saved in the most spectacular fashion imaginable. Her mind was a whirlwind of disbelief and a fragile, burgeoning hope. Adrian's home was not a house. It was a sanctuary. It was modern and spacious, but filled with books and art, reflections of a life lived with passion. It was a home built for 2, now occupied by 1. He led her into a cavernous library, where a fire was already crackling in a large stone fireplace, casting a warm, golden glow on the thousands of leather-bound volumes that lined the walls. He poured them both a brandy, his movements slow and deliberate. He handed her a glass, his fingers brushing hers. The scent of old paper, wood smoke, and rain filled the air. He stood by the fire, the amber hue of the flames dancing in his eyes. I should have told you who I was, he said, his voice laced with regret. I was afraid of changing what was growing between us. I didn't want you to see the CEO. I wanted you to see me. Alara looked at him, truly seeing him for the first time. The lonely man in the restaurant, the kind stranger who brought her orchids, the powerful titan who had defended her honor. They were all the same person. They were all Adrian. And she was falling in love with all of them. You let me see the man, she said softly. And I'm grateful for that. The emotional weight of the evening, of the past few weeks, settled upon them. The grand revelation was over, and now only the quiet, tender truth remained. He took a step closer to her, his gaze intense, searching. Alara, he began, his voice thick with an emotion he could no longer contain. Since Isabel died, I have been living in a gray world. I was just existing, managing my grief, managing my company. And then I met you. You walked into my storm and calmed the seas with nothing but your voice and your kindness. You reawakened my heart. You showed me that there is still light and color and beauty in the world. It's you. The declaration hung in the air, as sacred and profound as a prayer. All his wealth, all his power, was meaningless next to the simple, undeniable truth of his feelings for her. He had solved her material problems with his money, but she had solved his spiritual ones with her soul. He loved her. A sob of pure, cathartic release caught in her throat. The walls she had so carefully built around her own heart, the defenses she had needed to survive, crumbled into dust. You saved me, Adrian, she whispered, tears glistening in her eyes. You saw me when I thought I was invisible. No. He corrected her gently, reaching out to cup her face in his hands, his touch infinitely tender. We saved each other, and in the warm, flickering light of the fire, surrounded by the stories of 1,000 lifetimes. He leaned in and kissed her. It was a kiss of profound gratitude, of shared sorrow, and of a breathtaking, beautiful new beginning. They were home. 1 year later, the sun, a brilliant, golden orb, poured its light into a sprawling garden, illuminating a scene of perfect, idyllic peace. A little girl with bright, curious eyes and hair the color of spun gold chased a butterfly across a lawn of impossible green, her laughter echoing in the warm air like tiny, silver bells. This was Lily, her cheeks rosy with health, her breathing easy and free. On the porch of a beautiful, sun-drenched house, Alara sat watching her, a gentle, serene smile on her face. The haunted, weary lines of the waitress were gone, replaced by the radiant confidence of a woman who was cherished, respected, and deeply loved. She was no longer just surviving. She was thriving. A comfortable silence enveloped her, broken only by the sound of Lily's play and the soft click of a teacup being set down on the table beside her. Adrian sat down next to her, his arms sliding naturally around her shoulders. The deep, settled grief that had once shadowed his features had been replaced by a quiet, contented joy. He was no longer the hidden savior or the commanding CEO. Here, in this sanctuary they had built together, he was simply a husband and a father. He pressed a soft kiss to her temple. "What are you thinking about?" he murmured. She leaned her head against his shoulder, watching their daughter. "I was just thinking," she said, her voice filled with a sense of wonder that had never faded, "about the relentless hammering of rain on a window and a cold cup of coffee, and how a single, selfless act of kindness can change the entire world." He tightened his embrace, his heart full. They had found in each other not just a romantic partner, but the missing piece of their own souls. They were a family, forged in hardship, bound by love, and living a life more beautiful than either of them had ever dared to dream. Total peace. This story is a testament to the idea that the greatest strength is often found in the quietest acts of compassion. It's a fable about how one moment of selfless kindness, offered without any expectation of reward, can set in motion a series of events so miraculous they can heal the most shattered of hearts and rewrite the most desperate of destinies. Alara, in her darkest hour, chose empathy over fear, and in doing so, she didn't just save a stranger's business deal. She saved the man himself. Adrian, in turn, used his immense power not for revenge or for glory, but to silently and gently lift up the woman who had shown him light in the darkness. Their journey reminds us that we are all, in our own ways, both the virtuous sufferer and the hidden savior, capable of both profound resilience and extraordinary grace. If this story touched your heart and reaffirmed your faith in the power of human goodness, please let us know. In a world that can often feel cold and transactional, stories like Alara and Adrian's are a vital reminder that love and kindness are the most valuable currencies we possess. They are the true forces that can mend a broken world and build a future filled with hope. We invite you to join our community of viewers who believe in the power of soulful storytelling. For more soul-stirring narratives and inspiring tales of love conquering adversity, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to Soulful Love Tales. Your support allows us to continue bringing these heartwarming stories to light. We'll see you in the next one.